Was this where her life would end? Alone in the freezing mountains with an unborn child she had sworn to protect? Diane Gray could barely feel her feet as she stumbled through the snow, her thin dress whipping against the cold Colorado wind. Her hands clutched her swollen belly, trying to shelter the little life inside her from the bitter winter that had no mercy for the weak. Her lips shook, her breaths came shallow, and her vision blurred. She had been walking for 3 long days with almost no food, no shelter, and no hope left. Then she heard a voice behind her, a deep voice with the power of command. "Get on my horse now." Diane turned and saw a tall mountain man standing beside a dark brown horse. His coat was thick, his boots heavy with snow, and his face was covered with a dark beard touched with silver. His eyes were steady and strong, but not cold. He held a long rifle in one hand and had a blanket over his other arm. He looked like a man shaped by the mountains, someone who belonged to the wild and knew its dangers well. His name was Roy Scott. He had been tracking elk through the forest when he saw her struggling through the snow, almost collapsing with every step. For a moment, he wondered if she was real or a vision brought by winter's cruel tricks. But when he saw her fall to her knees, he knew she would not survive another hour if he walked away. Diane tried to stand, but her body gave out again. Roy walked toward her slowly, careful not to scare her. He placed the blanket around her shoulders, and for the first time in days, warmth touched her skin. Diane wanted to trust him, but fear still clung to her heart. She had seen kindness turn into cruelty before. She had seen promises turn into lies. But the baby kicked inside her, reminding her that fear would not keep them alive. She whispered her name, her voice tired and weak. "Diane Gray." Roy nodded. His voice was rough from years of silence, but gentle. "Roy Scott." He helped her onto his horse, lifting her with strong, steady arms, and then climbed up behind her. Diane leaned back against him because she had no strength left to sit on her own. Roy wrapped one arm around her to keep her from falling, and with his other hand he guided the horse into the snowy woods. As they rode, Diane closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his coat and the slow, steady rhythm of the horse carry her away from the cold darkness. The trail twisted through tall pine trees, over frozen streams, and up into the mountains. Snow covered everything, turning the world white and silent. The wind howled through the trees, but Roy kept a firm grip on her, shielding her from the worst of it. Diane's story was one that could break even the strongest spirit. She had traveled west with her husband, Thomas, full of hope for a new life. But when Thomas caught mountain fever, everything changed. She watched him fade away, helpless to stop it. They buried him under a pile of stones on the trail, and Diane's world cracked apart. The wagon train, once kind, began to see her as a burden. A pregnant widow with no husband and no strength to work was not welcome for long. She had begged them not to leave her, but cold hearts spoke louder than her tears. They promised to leave her at a small settlement, but it was no settlement at all, only an empty trading post with shattered windows and broken walls. Before the sun rose, the wagons rolled away, leaving her alone with 2 days' worth of food and a baby not yet born. She tried to survive, tried to stay strong, but hunger soon became a sharp pain that stole her sleep and strength. She walked for 3 days, hoping to find a house, a cabin, a road, anyone who would help. But the mountains offered only snow and silence. She had almost accepted death when Roy appeared. Roy had lived alone in the mountains for 7 years. He built his own cabin, hunted for food, and traded furs for supplies. After the war, he had left the world behind, choosing peace and loneliness instead of memories that haunted him. He did not invite others into his life. He trusted no one. Yet something about Diane made him stop. He could have turned away. He could have told himself it was not his problem. But he didn't. When they reached his cabin, it was small but strong, built with care. Smoke rose from the chimney and the warm glow of firelight spilled through the frosted windows. Roy helped her down, carried her inside, and wrapped another blanket around her. Diane sat near the fire, shivering as warmth slowly came back to her body. Roy made a bowl of hot venison stew, and when Diane tasted the first spoonful, tears filled her eyes. It was the first real food she had eaten in days. Roy watched her carefully, ready to refill her bowl without asking. There was no judgment in his eyes, only concern. As she ate, she studied him, a man who lived alone, far from the world, a man who had no reason to help her, yet he had. She didn't know why, and Roy did not explain. But the baby inside her kicked again, almost as if thanking him. For the first time since Thomas died, Diane felt safe. Not fully, not completely, but enough to breathe without fear. And, that night, as the wind roared outside the cabin, Roy made a silent promise to himself. He would protect this woman and her child. He didn't know how long she would stay or what fate had planned, but he knew this. He would not let her die. Not here. Not on his mountain. Diane woke the next morning wrapped in warmth she had almost forgotten existed. The fire still burned low in the hearth, and the smell of fresh bread filled the cabin. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then she saw Roy placing another log on the fire. He glanced her way and gave a small nod, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "You're safe here," he said. Those simple words loosened something inside her. She had been holding herself together for so long that the feeling of safety almost hurt. Days passed, and Diane slowly regained her strength. Roy never pried into her pain, never questioned her past, only focused on her health and the baby. He cooked, fetched water, and made sure she ate even when she tried to save food for later. He gave her his own bed, taking the chair by the fire at night. Diane argued once, saying he should sleep in his own bed, but he shook his head firmly. "You need it more." Quote, as the winter storm thickened around the cabin, Roy worked with quiet purpose. He checked his traps, chopped firewood, repaired the shed, and made sure their supplies would last. Diane offered to help, but her body was still too weak. He only asked her to rest. But resting did not stop her mind from drifting back to her past. At night, while Roy slept in the chair, Diane would stare at the ceiling and feel the weight of everything she had lost. Her husband, her home, her place in the world. Tears came more often than sleep. One night, after a long silence, Roy spoke without opening his eyes. "You don't have to carry every burden alone." His voice was low, almost a whisper, but Diane felt it reach the parts of her heart she had tried to keep locked away. She didn't answer. She didn't know how. As the weeks passed, Roy began teaching her small things about mountain life. How to tell when snow meant shelter or travel. How to brew tea from pine needles for strength. How to tell animal tracks apart. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he taught, there was a warmth in his voice that made Diane feel seen, not just protected. She began to help in small ways. She cleaned the cabin, mended clothes, and cooked meals when she felt strong enough. She even read aloud to him on winter evenings from the stack of books he kept on a small shelf. Roy would sit in his chair, eyes closed, listening to her soft voice fill the room. One night, when she stopped reading mid-page, she noticed his hand had relaxed, and for the first time he looked peaceful. It became their routine. And in that routine, something quiet and gentle began to grow. Roy also prepared for the baby. He cleared a space and built a small wooden cradle with his own hands. Diane watched him shape the wood, sanding it smooth with care. She saw how his fingers, rough from years of work, handled the wood like something fragile. When he finished, he stood back awkwardly, uncertain, as if afraid she might reject the gift. Diane touched the cradle, her throat tight. "It's beautiful." She meant it. No one had ever built something so full of care just for her. The baby came one night when the wind was screaming outside, rattling the windows. Roy kept the fire hot, boiled water, and helped Diane through every painful moment. He stayed by her side, guiding her with calm strength. Hours passed, and finally a baby boy cried into the night. A strong, healthy sound that filled the cabin with life. Diane held her son close, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas," she whispered, naming him after her late husband. Roy said nothing, but his eyes shone with emotion. He wrapped mother and child in blankets and sat beside them through the night. After that night, the cabin changed. Moments of silence were replaced with tiny cries, soft laughter, and the gentle rocking of a cradle. Roy carved little toys and hummed low tunes to calm the baby when he fussed. Diane watched him with growing wonder. This man, who once lived with only the mountains for company, was learning to care for a newborn with patience and tenderness. Spring came slowly. The snow began to melt, and sunlight returned to the valley. With the thaw came a difficult truth. Diane had a choice to make. She could continue west and try to build the life she had once dreamed of, or she could stay here in this hidden valley, where she had found warmth, safety, and a kind of peace she had never expected. Roy felt the choice coming too. One evening he stood by the door, staring out at the fading daylight. "When the past clears," he said, "you'll be able to travel again." Diane's heart tightened. For the first time in months, she feared the future more than the past. She looked at Roy, at the man who had saved her life and her child's. "Do you want us to leave?" she asked softly. Roy turned toward her, and the answer was clear before he spoke. "No. But what I want shouldn't trap you here. You deserve a life. A good one." She realized then that Roy wasn't pushing her away. He was giving her the freedom no one else ever had, and that made her see him in a new light. Not just as her rescuer, but as a man with a heart strong enough to let her choose her own path. Little did they know, the choice she made would soon become a story the whole West would talk about for years to come. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Spring painted the valley with new colors. Green grass pushed through melting snow, and wildflowers dotted the hillside like nature's own celebration. Diane often stood outside with baby Thomas in her arms, looking at the mountains that had once felt like a prison but now felt like a shield around her heart. The world beyond those peaks waited for her, but she no longer knew if she belonged to it. One afternoon, Diane sat on the cabin steps while Roy repaired a fence nearby. Thomas slept against her shoulder, his soft breath warm on her neck. Diane watched Roy work. Every swing of the hammer, every careful adjustment of wood showed the same quiet patience he had shown since the day he found her. He did not know she was watching, which made the moment even more real. She thought about her late husband. Thomas had been gentle and full of dreams. Losing him had shattered her, but Roy had given her something she never expected to feel again, a chance to live, not just survive. She realized then that the love she once had did not make her heart too full to love again. It had made her heart capable of seeing goodness where others missed it. The next morning, Roy found Diane packing a small bag. His chest tightened, but he hid it well. "You leaving today?" he asked quietly. She turned, looking at him with calm eyes. "No, I was packing things to wash by the creek." She paused, then added softly, "I'm not going anywhere." Roy froze. He had prepared himself for goodbye since winter ended. He wasn't ready to believe her. "You sure? You don't owe me anything." Diane stepped closer. "Maybe not. But I owe myself the truth. I don't want to go. Not away from you. Not away from this place. This is home now, Roy." Her words hit him harder than the mountain winds ever had. He lowered his head, swallowing emotion he rarely let surface. "If you stay, it won't be easy. Life here is rough." Quote. Diane smiled, a quiet, steady smile that reached her eyes. "Life everywhere is rough, but here, I'm not facing it alone." Roy looked at the baby in her arms, then at the woman who had survived so much. "You deserve more than a cabin in the mountains. And you deserve more than loneliness," she replied. "Maybe we can build more together." Roy didn't rush to speak. He stepped forward and reached out, brushing his knuckles gently against Thomas's tiny hand. The baby wrapped his fingers around Roy's, and something inside Roy broke open in the softest way. "I want you to stay," Roy finally said. "Both of you." Diane placed her free hand over his. It was the first time she had touched him on her own. Then ask me properly. Roy took a breath. He wasn't a man of fancy words, but his heart spoke simply and true. I ain't offering the world, Diane, but I can offer a life. A life where you're safe. A life where you're cared for. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your husband and raise Thomas as my own. Quote. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the depth of his sincerity. Yes, Roy, I would be proud to be your wife. They married that summer. A traveling preacher passed through the valley, and their wedding took place under a tall pine tree, with sunlight shining through the branches. Diane wore a simple dress she had sewn herself. Roy stood beside her in his cleanest shirt, his hair trimmed, and his heart full. Their vows were quiet, but strong, like the two people making them. When he kissed her, it was gentle, almost reverent, as if he still couldn't believe she was real. Word of their story spread slowly at first. Roy's rare trips to trading posts carried whispers. Folks didn't just talk about a mountain man who saved a starving widow. They spoke about how he protected her with no expectation, no reward, no shame. In a world where many took advantage of the weak, Roy becoming her husband out of love, not pity, stunned the West. Years passed, and the cabin grew with the family. Roy built extra rooms as their children filled the home with laughter. Diane planted a garden behind the cabin that became known for miles. Travelers who lost their way often stumbled into the valley and found food, warmth, and care waiting for them. Roy never turned anyone away. Diane never let a hungry soul leave without a full belly and hope. Thomas grew up strong and proud, never doubting who his father was. Roy raised him with honor, teaching him the ways of the mountains, the value of work, and the meaning of love born from courage rather than comfort. Their story became a legend told around campfires, whispered on wagon trails, and printed in newspapers. People said the moment Roy told that starving widow, "Get on my horse now," was the moment two lives changed, and a legacy began. Roy and Diane grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands wrinkled from work and love. They sat side by side on the same cabin steps where Diane once doubted her future, watching sunsets over the mountains with peace in their hearts. And when they left this world, they left behind more than children or a cabin. They left a reminder that one act of compassion can rewrite an entire lifetime. One simple choice to help someone can echo across generations. In the Wild West, where hardship shaped most stories, theirs became one of hope, of love found in the coldest winter, of a man who gave warmth to a woman on the edge of death and built a life with her that warmed countless others. Their legend lived on, not just in history books, but in the hearts of those who believed that the greatest heroes were often the quiet ones. The ones who acted not for glory but because it was right. And all of it began with 5 simple words spoken on a snowy trail. "Get on my horse now."